August 1942, 2 months after the Battle of Midway. The smoke has cleared, the casualties have been counted, and in the quiet offices of Japanese Naval Command, a devastating truth is becoming impossible to ignore. The war is lost. But how did it come to this? How did a nation that achieved one of history's most stunning military surprises find itself staring into the abyss just 8 months later? To understand this story, we need to go back to where it all began. 7:55 a.m. Hawaiian time. The morning sky over Pearl Harbor explodes with the roar of Japanese aircraft. 353 planes, launched from 6 aircraft carriers, descend on the unsuspecting American Pacific Fleet in 2 devastating waves. The attack is brutally efficient. Within 2 hours, the unthinkable happens. 8 battleships are sunk or damaged. 188 American aircraft are destroyed on the ground. More than 2,400 Americans, military personnel and civilians, lose their lives. The pride of the U.S. Pacific Fleet lies burning in the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor. From a tactical perspective, it's a masterpiece. Admiral Yamamoto's carefully planned strike has achieved almost everything it set out to do. Almost. But even as Japanese U.S. pilots return to their carriers celebrating their success, critical failures are already apparent to those paying attention. First, the American aircraft carriers aren't there. Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, the 3 most important ships in the Pacific Fleet, are at sea, completely untouched. In the coming war, these carriers, not battleships, will prove to be the decisive weapons. Second, the massive fuel storage facilities containing millions of gallons of oil essential to Pacific operations are left untouched. Third, the submarine base is ignored. These submarines will soon become Japan's worst nightmare. Fourth, the repair facilities remain intact. Because most ships sank in shallow water, salvage operations will be relatively easy. Within months, many of these destroyed ships will return to service. But the greatest failure isn't tactical, it's psychological. There's a famous quote attributed to Admiral Yamamoto: "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Here's the truth. Yamamoto probably never said those exact words. That line comes from a 1970 Hollywood movie. But what Yamamoto actually said was even more prophetic. In 1940, before the war began, Yamamoto told his superiors, "If we are ordered to do it, then I can guarantee to put up a tough fight for the first 6 months, but I have absolutely no confidence as to what would happen if it went on for 2 or 3 years. 6 months. That was the window Yamamoto believed Japan had before American industrial might would overwhelm them. And while his staff celebrated after Pearl Harbor, witnesses reported that Yamamoto alone spent the day sunk in apparent depression. He knew what was coming. Pearl Harbor unified American public opinion in ways Japanese planners never anticipated. The attack was supposed to demoralize America into negotiating a quick peace. Instead, it created absolute determination to fight to total victory. There's another problem: timing. Japanese diplomats were supposed to deliver a declaration of war 30 minutes before the attack began. Due to decoding delays, the declaration arrived after the bombs started falling. This made Pearl Harbor appear not as a legitimate military strike but as treachery, a sneak attack that violated every code of warfare. President Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. And that label stuck. Japan had handed America the perfect rallying cry. Within days, Americans who had been deeply isolationist were lining up to enlist. War bond drives were oversubscribed. Factories began running 3 shifts. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers. The sleeping giant was not just awake, it was enraged. 4 months after Pearl Harbor, something happens that shocks the Japanese military establishment to its core. On April 18, 1942, 16 American B-25 bombers, launched from the aircraft carrier Hornet, appear over Tokyo and other Japanese cities, dropping their bombs before disappearing toward China. The physical damage is minimal: a few buildings destroyed, a handful of casualties. Militarily, it's insignificant. Psychologically, it's devastating. The raid shatters the myth of Japan's homeland invulnerability. It proves American carriers can approach Japan itself. It forces Japan to keep aircraft and troops in the home islands for defense, resources desperately needed elsewhere. Most critically, it prompts the Japanese High Command to accelerate their plans for a decisive naval battle, to destroy the remaining American carriers once and for all. They choose their target, Midway Island. Exactly 6 months after Pearl Harbor, precisely when Yamamoto's prophecy predicted, the decisive battle begins. The Japanese plan is complex, involving multiple forces approaching Midway from different directions to confuse and overwhelm American defenders. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, the same carriers that struck Pearl Harbor, lead the assault. But the Americans are waiting. U.S. codebreakers have cracked Japanese communications. They know exactly when and where the attack will come. Admiral Chester Nimitz positions his forces perfectly. What follows is 4 days of the most intense naval aviation combat in history. And when the smoke clears, the result is catastrophic for Japan. All 4 Japanese fleet carriers are destroyed. 292 aircraft are lost. Over 3,000 Japanese sailors and airmen are dead, including many of Japan's most experienced pilots. The American losses: 1 carrier, the Yorktown, 150 aircraft, approximately 300 casualties, but the numbers don't tell the full story. Japan entered the war with 11 aircraft carriers. After Midway they have 7, and 2 are damaged, but carriers can be replaced. What cannot be replaced are the pilots. Japanese naval aviation began the war with approximately 3,500 highly trained carrier pilots, men who had trained for years and were arguably the best in the world. By summer 1942, roughly 40% of them are dead. The survivors are exhausted, flying multiple missions per day with inadequate rest. Japanese training programs are producing maybe 100 new carrier-qualified pilots per month, and these new pilots have perhaps 200 hours of flight time, compared to the 800-plus hours the veterans accumulated before the war. Every experienced Japanese pilot lost is effectively irreplaceable. Meanwhile, American training programs are producing thousands of pilots monthly. Their training isn't as intensive initially, but the sheer numbers mean American losses can be replaced rapidly. Japanese losses cannot. At current attrition rates, Japan will run out of experienced carrier pilots by mid-1943, regardless of how many carriers they have. Now the true scope of Japan's miscalculation becomes apparent. Let's talk about carriers. In the 3 years following Midway, Japan will manage to build 6 aircraft carriers. The United States will build 17. From November 1942 until wars, and America will commission 26 new fleet and light carriers. Japan will commission 8, but the carrier gap is just the beginning. In 1939, U.S. military aircraft production was less than 3,000 planes. By war's end, America will have produced 300,000 aircraft. Let that sink in. 300,000 aircraft. In 1942 alone, America builds 22,000 planes. By 1944, the annual rate grows to $96,000. Japan increased its fighter production by 171% from 1941 to 1942. Impressive, right? Except American production is increasing exponentially faster. The gap isn't closing, it's becoming a chasm. And it's not just planes. American industry provides 297,000 aircraft, 193,000 artillery pieces, 86,000 tanks, and 2 million army trucks during the war. Japan's economy is a fraction of America's size. Its industrial capacity is perhaps 1/10 of America's. Its oil production is essentially zero without imports. In a protracted war of attrition, these disparities guarantee defeat. Here's the cruel irony. Japan went to war primarily to secure access to oil and raw materials. They succeeded in capturing the Dutch East Indies oil fields mostly intact. But success created a new problem. The oil has to be transported to Japan, and American submarines are waiting. In January 1942, Japan loses 15 merchant ships to submarine attacks. By June, they're losing 30 ships per month. By August, the rate increases to 40 ships monthly. The trend is terrifying. Japanese shipbuilding can produce perhaps 200,000 tons of merchant shipping per year. They're losing 300,000 tons per year, and the losses are accelerating. By 1943, submarine warfare will cut oil imports to levels insufficient to maintain military operations. Japan will have oil fields but no way to get the oil home. Japan conquered vast territories in 6 months: the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, Burma, and numerous Pacific islands. This expansion created a defensive perimeter thousands of miles long. Defending it requires dispersing Japanese forces across dozens of garrisons, many in isolated locations that are difficult to supply and impossible to reinforce quickly. The Americans, by contrast, can concentrate their forces. They can choose where and when to attack. Japan has to defend everywhere. This fundamental asymmetry means that even with equal forces, the Americans have the advantage. But forces aren't equal. American strength is growing. Japanese strength is declining. The mathematics are inescapable. In early August 1942, American forces land on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. The Japanese fight desperately to dislodge them, but Guadalcanal represents a new American strategy. Seize forward bases, build airfields, use those airfields to dominate surrounding areas, then advance to the next target. It's methodical. It's grinding. And it works. Japan cannot match this approach. Japanese logistics are inadequate. Japanese industrial production can't provide enough aircraft, ships, and supplies to match American reinforcement rates. Every battle is becoming a battle of attrition, and Japan is losing the attrition calculus at every level. By August 1942, 2 months after Midway, the truth is undeniable to anyone willing to see it. Pearl Harbor was a tactical success but a strategic catastrophe of the first magnitude. It achieved nothing Japan needed while unifying and enraging the one opponent Japan absolutely needed to avoid fighting. Yamamoto understood this from the beginning. He opposed war with the United States, arguing that Japan couldn't win. He was overruled by army leaders and civilian officials who believed American democracy was weak and decadent, that Americans lacked the will to fight a long war, that a quick series of victories would force American capitulation. Every one of these assumptions proved catastrophically wrong. The attack on Pearl Harbor wasn't Japan's path to victory. It was the moment Japan lost the war. They just didn't know it yet. History often turns on single decisions, single moments where the course of the future is set in motion. Pearl Harbor was one of those moments. It's a stark reminder that in war, tactical brilliance means nothing without strategic wisdom. That understanding your enemy's psychology is as important as understanding their military capabilities. That industrial capacity in modern warfare ultimately determines victory more than courage or skill. Admiral Yamamoto's 6-month prophecy proved eerily accurate. Japan ran wild for exactly 6 months, winning victory after victory. Then came Midway, and the rest, as they say, is history. The war would continue for 3 more years. Millions more would die. But the outcome was decided in those first 6 months, sealed by a surprise attack that succeeded too well for its own good. Pearl Harbor didn't break American power. It awakened it, and once awakened, that power was unstoppable.